And just to introduce the committee members, in case you missed the earlier introductions, I'm Dick Sears. I represent Bennington County, small sections of Windham County, the smaller towns. And the town of Wilmington is probably the biggest Windham County town.
Hi, Nader Hashim, Senator from Windham County. Good to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
Bob Norris, Senator Franklin County, and Alberg to include Grand Isle. Nice to see you again.
Tanya Bihovsky, I represent Chittenden Central, which is most of Burlington, all of Winooski, a tiny bit of Colchester, and most of Essex.
And Senator Baruch will be in and out. He represents parts of.
He represents the same district.
Same place, okay. So with that, my first question to everyone is, why would you like to be a judge?
Well, I started my career with the public defender's office, which meant time in court all day, every day, and a really steep learning curve. You know, you jump right into representing individuals on your own and going to trial if you need to. And so I got a really close-up view of the court system day in and day out. And what I realized over time, because my goal was always to find a way to help people. And I wanted to help people in criminal court to deal with the difficult situations that they were in, to help them show their innocence, or to help them resolve the case in the way that would work for them. Over time, both in criminal and juvenile court, I began to look at the system in a larger way and feel that what I had to offer was not necessarily as an advocate, but in seeing that people were treated fairly on all sides, and seeing that the system worked as best it could, as to leave all litigants. You don't want the court to be like a factory, just churning through cases and putting people right back out where they were before. You want to use the court's influence to solve problems and leave people better positioned than before, even if they don't necessarily have the outcome that they want. You resolve the dispute in the best way that you can and fairly.
You were a judicial master, or are?
I think was.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what happened. So you were appointed as a judicial master and then appointed as a judge by the governor, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you describe a little bit of your job as judicial master and how that went? And because that was a new position that the legislature and Judiciary jointly created a few years back that was going to solve all the problems before COVID.
Absolutely. So I was a judicial master from June 2020 until December of 2023. And I became interested in that position because I had been part of a working group in Chittenden County to apply for a family treatment docket there. And the judicial master position was created sort of in conjunction, I believe, with opening a family treatment docket there.
Right.
And at that point, I had been the public defender from the Chittenden office assigned to all juvenile cases, all CHINS cases, not necessarily delinquencies. And so I'd been doing that for 5 years and had really seen how people come in to that system just in terrible situations, and how much support they need, and how not just the parents but the children can really be impacted by how those cases can really drag on. And a treatment docket and a judicial master seemed like excellent ways to increase access to services for parents and also help cases move more expeditiously. So in Franklin County and Chittenden County, in the judicial master role, I heard pretrials, status hearings, uncontested disposition hearings, post-disposition review hearings, and permanency planning hearings. And I think what I was able to do was free up time in the schedule for the presiding judge to deal with contested hearings, termination of parental rights hearing, dispositions hearing, merits hearings, and that I think reduced the delay to get to those important points in a case. It also gave the parents the opportunity to have more court oversight, which can be helpful, I think, in motivating parents to engage with DCF and engage with services. So there were cases where the attorneys would actually ask to have the case come in more frequently with me so that I could just check in with the parents, hear from DCF as to what they had done in terms of making progress with their case plan, and encourage them to kind of keep taking the next right step to move forward. And in a lot of cases, that seemed to be really effective. And then in that role, I also presided in the family treatment court in Chittenden County. And I loved it.
Senator Bowski?
My question's the question I've asked everyone. Where are you going? What will you preside over?
I will be in Newfane Civil.
Okay.
Newfane, few people know where that is.
I happen to
You know
where
know,
it is.
it's right down the road from me.
I know, I knew that.
So a lot of the questions I've had for previous witnesses were already answered in your packet, so thank you.
Substance abuse seems to be a major issue for everybody to deal with, whether it be anywhere within the criminal and any court system as well as in the communities. What do you see as some of the solutions that you as a judge can bring about?
So it was really interesting to get to know the parents who were participating in the family treatment docket, because over time, I was able to develop a rapport with them. And I think many of them came to feel very comfortable being really honest about their struggles. And, you know, what I learned from that, and what we already know, but what was really clear to me were, you know, these were all people who were in situations they did not want to be in. And they were stuck with this really maladaptive coping mechanism. And they could not, many of them, find a way out of it on their own. And I think the first thing that we worked on was trying to reduce the stigma around it, to make it clear that when they came in, we were not looking at them as bad people because of what they were struggling with. And that we were looking at them as people with a health problem that we wanted to help them address. And so I think the first thing the court can do is, when you know that people are coming in with criminal behavior that's driven by substance use disorder, is treat them as people who are struggling with a health problem and help them get to a point where they feel comfortable being honest about it and open to accepting support. And then I think from there, the court oversight, you know, certainly through probation conditions, conditions of release, but also just through bringing people together in court hearings, can do a lot to encourage parents in all of the progress that they might make. Or if they're not making progress, to just encourage them to try again. You know, we know that it takes many people multiple times in accessing treatment before they make progress. We know that a lapse is not the same as a relapse. And we also know that people on their road to recovery, many will relapse, but it doesn't mean that they will not get there. And so to be a supportive and encouraging voice, rather than a condemning voice, I think goes a long way.
What's your opinion of when people are amenable to treatment. I mean, many people will reject treatment. You know, we've seen cases in Bennington, the EMTs, Bennington Police Department, and the local Turning Point Club work together. So if there's an overdose, they all go and see if that person's amenable to treatment. Many times they are, many times they're not. So, you know, did you find that most of the people that you had through the court were amenable to treatment because of the court or because of some other issue?
I think that a good percentage of people that I saw in our treatment docket did not come in really amenable to treatment. I think they came in because they felt they had to, because they felt it was their only chance to reunify with their children, but they, I think they wanted to do things on their own because they didn't want to open up about, you know, the hardest thing in their life that they don't even want to be honest with themselves about. And so, you know, when I was a public defender, I spent a couple of years as the public defender assigned to the adult treatment court. And this was some years ago. And at that time, the approach was, if someone was struggling with ongoing use, we made them go to residential treatment. And if they wouldn't go, then we put them in jail until they went. Now, in family treatment court, of course, you can't put people in jail, and you can't really order people to go to treatment. You can just really strongly suggest it. But what I learned through working with substance use clinicians is that it's actually not necessarily the best idea to take someone who is in a place where they're not amenable to treatment and force them to go to an inpatient program because they're just not ready for it. And instead, there are a number of treatment avenues that are just about minimum level of engagement. And you try to keep people connected to something positive. And you start with really small steps and you help people get there on their own. And so I think we have a lot more ways to reach people now and to just try to engage them. And at every opportunity, give them that option. And I think that, you know, you wish there was an easy answer.
No, I appreciate your answers, and that's very helpful to me. Frankly, one of my biggest disappointments is when somebody is amenable to treatment, even if it's a short period of time, just after an arrest, for example, and the treatment is not available. That is probably the most frustrating thing, because we know that, you know, 2 weeks from now, they won't be amenable. And,
well, and if you don't mind my saying, I think one of the strengths of like treatment courts, or at least frequent court oversight, is that when you're working with a person who does want to go to inpatient treatment, and we have this situation all the time, you know that they have a bed date 3 weeks from now. So how do you support that person through those 3 weeks, keep them alive, keep them engaged, and make sure that they get there? And that, you know, that took hands on all sides. But we were able to do that.
thank you. Any other questions?
Just a quick one here. Congratulations. What are your expectations, if any, coming into this role that you hope to fulfill in a quote?
Well, I wasn't expecting to be in civil court to start. So let me say that. So my first expectation is that I have a whole new system to learn. And I'm really excited about that. You know, I had a point as a public defender where I've been doing criminal law for 5 years, and I thought I was going to keep doing criminal law. And then I was told, now you're going to do juvenile law. And so I had to learn that very quickly. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this for a year or two because that's what everyone else does. And then I'll get back to the criminal work that I want to be doing. But that wasn't at all what happened. And so for one thing, I want to keep an open mind. But my hope is that I can take the experience that I've had and the resources that are available to me throughout the judiciary to have a more consistent system that it gives Vermonters statewide access to similar resources, similar treatment options, and similar court supports.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks so much for coming over. Appreciate it. And good luck in Newfane.
Well, thank you.
It's a nice town.
I've been there once.
Rather isolated.
10 minutes south is Brattleboro, so
I was
it's,
gonna say, not too far from
It's
Brattleboro,
fine.
there's lots going on there.
there's a great coffee
I'm
shop
joking.
across the street from the court.
We used to have a courthouse in Manchester and one in Bennington. Now we just use the Bennington Civil Court, but it was interesting because the Manchester court was quite uncomfortable to sit in. Either as a juror or as a witness or anything. It was, I don't know about the judge. I think the judges had pretty good seats.
Well, the Newfane courthouse is really beautiful if you've never been there. So, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Judge Spiro.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Judge, thank you for joining us this morning, and you are kind of the question, I guess I'll ask you the same question I've asked the other 4 judges. Why do you want to be a judge?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here this morning. It's an honor to be here and to have been appointed in the first place. I have wanted to be a judge since I was in high school. I was sort of a government and history nerd and really always was just fascinated by the role that the judiciary and that judges play in our society and in our democracy. And so this was something that's always been a goal. I think judges are just so critical in making sure, you can have democratically elected legislators and you can, have a democratically elected governor, but the way that the laws are actually imposed on a case-by-case basis and how they're enforced both in all the dockets is critically important to a functioning democracy. And so I've always just really been interested in that role, and I feel like I have personality traits that will make me a good judge, hopefully. And yeah, so I went to law school because eventually I wanted to be a judge. So this is where I've always been hoping to get to.
You've heard questions regarding substance abuse and et cetera. Your thoughts about the number of cases where substance abuse is prevalent that the court is now seeing and the overload? I'm going to use the term. Some use the term backlog.
I think that the interplay between substance use and the criminal justice system is a tragedy in the sense that the criminal justice system is not built to handle addiction, which is a disease, it's an illness. I think that the legislature and not only in Vermont, but nationally, lots of places have tried to adjust the judicial system to try to make it amenable to helping people with addiction and to trying to facilitate recovery from addiction. And I think that the jails have done that as well. And I think that that's great. But I think that it makes the judiciary's job harder, makes judges' jobs harder because addiction is such a challenging issue. I mean, I come at it from I have some family who have had addiction issues, and I know people who've had addiction issues, but that was not part of my work. But I come at it more from having read about it in the news. And it's a very, very difficult problem. And the judiciary and, judges are not the best people to be dealing with it from like I guess what I call systemic or background, fundamental perspective. But I think it's critical for judges to be able to deal with it because that's where we are, and that is what is driving a lot. Mental health and addiction are driving a lot of people into the judicial system. And I think keeping that in mind as a judge is critically important, and understanding where people are coming from and understanding how best to fulfill the goals of, rehabilitation as part of criminal sentencing and things like that. You have to understand what the underlying root causes are, and addiction is obviously one of those.
About 95% of your casework before coming to judiciary were in either civil matters or probate matters. And I'm assuming that a lot of your work as a judge will be in the criminal and juvenile courts. Is there a steep learning curve, or are you ready for those challenges?
I think the answer to both of your questions is yes. There's a steep learning curve, and I think I'm ready. Most of my work, almost all my work, has been either civil or probate. But I love the law. I'm interested in the law. I enjoy learning about the law. Chief Judge has put together an incredible training program that has been really great. I spent all day yesterday with 3 amazing and brilliant criminal judges who were able to sort of teach us what we need to know as criminal judges. I've got lots to read and lots to review. I'll be shadowing some really talented and skilled judges, and I look forward to that. But I feel it will be a steep learning curve. I mean, there's no way around that. I have had the privilege, really, of going through this with 4 other folks who are in the same position, and they all have a criminal background. To some extent, 3 have a very intense criminal background, and I've also been able to talk to them and work with them, and I've been able to share some knowledge and information about the civil docket, and so that's been very helpful.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Bowles.
Yeah, so looking at your answer to question 43, you sort of, and a couple times mentioned the impartiality of the judicial system, and I'm wondering if you view our judicial system as it is currently as impartial and without bias.
Well, it's impossible to any individual, and therefore for any system, to be without bias, right? We all have unconscious biases that we're carrying around with us all the time. The best we can do is try to understand what they are. And I think that at least most of the judges I've spoken to, and myself, I try to be aware of the biases that I carry around. So no, nothing is without bias, but I think you can still make an impartial system that does its best to remove conscious and unconscious biases by trainings and working to reveal those biases to make the system as impartial as possible. I mean, we're human, so it can't be perfect,
Of course.
but as the best we can do.
Wonderful. Thank you. My other question is if you see a role, and if so, what that role is for the judiciary in restorative justice.
In the what?
Restorative justice.
Oh.
Same question I've asked everyone.
Oh, I should have known.
So I have not worked directly with restorative justice. I'm familiar with what it is, both that it exists pre-trial and that it can also be part of probation sentencing. I think theoretically it is a wonderful part of the process because the goal should be that, especially for folks who are coming into the system with either relatively minor offenses or not one of their first offenses, to have this be the only time and to have it give them tools to both find closure for what happened and to prevent it from happening in the future. So theoretically, it all sounds like a lot of good things happen through the restorative justice program, but I don't have any personal contact with it to know anything more than that.
Fair. And then 2 more. One is similar to a question I've asked many, is sort of what you view as the judiciary's role in alleviating systemic injustice.
So each case is individualized and each person has to be looked at as an individual. And I think that understanding general systemic and our society-wide biases that exist and systemic injustice that exists can help inform how a judge can look at the background of a person in each individual case. But there's not one way to handle all kinds of a particular case or all kinds of a particular type of people that come, whether it's people who are addicted to something, whether it's parents, whether it's people of a particular race or religion. Everyone's an individual, but I think the most important thing the judiciary can do is make sure that all judges understand the systemic injustices that exist and the systemic biases that exist, so that once you air those things out, it's easier to deal with them and address them.
Thank you. And then my last question is, where are you headed?
So I'm all the criminal folks are not sitting in criminal. I'm sitting in criminal court primarily in Chittenden.
Okay.
And I will have 2 days a week in civil, and I may do some family work as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Norris.
Yes, I do have a question. Under question 43, I just find it at an early age, you knew that you wanted to be a judge. Even in high school, you said that before you attended law school. And I'm just wondering, where did that fascination come from?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of hubris involved in that feeling, right? But I honestly, in my AP government class in high school, I read the book The Brethren by, I think, Woodward, and it wasn't Bernstein. I can't remember who the other author was, which was about the United States Supreme Court during the Warren and the transition to the Burger Court. And I just became, I loved the book. It was one of the, probably my favorite book I've read up to that point. And I became obsessed with the United States Supreme Court and became really interested in what judges do and becoming a judge, and it just never really stopped. There was a brief moment where I thought I might be a farmer after college, but it didn't work out, and so I decided to go to law school instead.
Thank you.
Stick with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
Last but not least, I mispronounce that, Judge Tebow. Judge, welcome back to Senate Judiciary after a year.
And you too.
As I said earlier, a different role.
It's definitely comforting to be here and not having to testify on a bill and getting to talk about myself and easier topics than some of the legislation.
I think we first got to know you over a horse.
Yes, I believe my first time appearing here was
Bunny.
animal cruelty laws.
Cruelty. And I was impressed with your advocacy for the horse and for justice in that case, and the changes that we needed in the law. So, yeah, just from the start, I want to say that.
Thank you very much.
However, now you are applying to be a judge, and we have for no reason to understand why you want to be a judge.
Well, I think the answer to that is fairly easy, which is, I hope from the time I've spent with this committee and others here, there are two things that really drive my professional passions. First is a passion for the law, and the second is a drive for public service. So my entire professional career has been in public service, whether through to the United States military or to the state of Vermont. And, in that I've really had a diverse set of experiences. I think most people will recall or know me as being the former Washington County State's Attorney, and they view me through the lens of being a prosecutor. But behind that, within the military, I had periods of time being a military public defender in the United States Army. And additionally, my reserve service, which was the first 4 years I was back in Vermont, I predominantly worked on legal aid and legal assistance to Army Reserve soldiers throughout the Northeast. So in that sense, there's a broader set of legal experience that I brought to the table.
Other questions for Judge Tebow? Senator.
I mean, they're going to be the same questions I asked others. What do you view, or do you view, and if so, what do you view as the judiciary's role in restorative justice?
Well, it's a really large one. I think that I have the benefit of having been serving for already 6 months within the judiciary, and my docket right now is predominantly the juvenile docket, some relief from abuse and stalking work as well. And whether we're dealing with a delinquency matter or a child in need of supervision, there are very few times when there's not some restorative component or some work done towards addressing harm. That can be explicitly through a probation condition, can be the disposition of a case sometimes. But really, I view that whether we're in the context of a delinquency, youthful offender, criminal case, we're really looking to do two things. It's generally geared towards repairing harm and then preventing future harm or reducing future risk. So when we look at let's say an offender, a lot of the focus may be on their individual rehabilitation or reducing the chance for repairing harm that they caused and then reducing their risk to the public. And the insight gained from participation in a reparative board is sometimes incredibly impactful. In my service as prosecutor, we frequently hear from individuals who went through not even crimes of violence, but just going through a reparative process for driving under the influence, and hearing from families who have been directly impacted gave insight that they may not have had before. In other contexts, there's a lot that can be said, and unfortunately, not every victim is willing to directly participate, but typically there are people who are there and can provide that insight. And I do believe that most people going through the justice system, they may have done something wrong, but inside they still have a moral compass and a conscience and are willing to receive sometimes that feedback or that needed push as to recognition of how they harm somebody. And we can't assure that everyone will always take from that what we want, but I think it's a positive aspect. In some cases, restorative justice can be the exclusive outcome. In others, it's part of a combined outcome with supervisory conditions and other conditions that can have a broader impact in ensuring that they have incentives to stay on the law-abiding side of things.
And as a perhaps follow-up, perhaps aside, what do you view as the judiciary's role in tackling systemic injustice?
Well, I think that Judge Sparrow said it very well, that each case requires an individualized approach. And of course, that draws a lot of other questions. And as my former role as a prosecutor and now as a judge, it's tough to look sometimes at the inputs of the system. What is coming into court? The one thing judges do not have control over are who files cases or how a state's attorney charges them. We, as judges, are largely reacting to what's in front of us. I think, so in that sense, there's some limited controls over what comes in, but that said, how dispositions and outcomes are handled fall more into the purview of what judges can control and what can be explored. And what I found thus far in my experience is asking critical or probing questions of parties about why decisions were made, and not allowing sometimes challenging assumptions or status quo and as to why the decision was made, not just resting on the sheer exercise of discretion. So that in to itself would help ensure that there's transparency and at least a record as to why a decision is being made. Consistency is also important, but we can't adopt a one-size-fits-all system of justice in any context, because cases are different, circumstances are different. But I think there does have to be a critical eye when we're looking at traditionally marginalized or disadvantaged groups that may be appearing more frequently than would seem to meet the eye in court. So unfortunately, there is no one single answer to it, but I think being cognizant of our own biases, being cognizant of implicit bias, and then examining the system to see whether there are decision points or agency actions that are leading to disparate outcomes is important. And I've said this before, more so in my role as a prosecutor, but every screening tool we use has some advantages and drawbacks, and frequently our colleagues in Department of Corrections and DCF will talk about the validation of these tools. And yet some of them, for example, the OSI, still have questions that are baked in that would tend to highlight or elevate risk when individuals are coming from a background of poverty or when there's substance use in the family. And the utility of that in determining the youth, let's say, or juvenile's risk may be great, it may be little, and that's why it is important to scratch below the surface and not just take that every child who comes with a high risk assessment or a medium risk assessment, but that necessarily reflects the reality of what they need in order to be successful in the transition from youth to adulthood. So I don't mean to pick and say that these are bad tools, but I think having a critical eye and not just assuming that the conclusory results of a screening are predictive of who someone is important.
No, that's really helpful, and I appreciate your sort of recognition that the screening tools are created from within a system that is grounded in certain types of bias, and so that's critical. One thing that is just coming to mind, and I would imagine because judges have the sole discretion around bail, I don't know if you're aware, but the Crime Research Group put out a bunch of bail statistics not too long ago, and it shows that people of color are much more significantly likely to be held without bail than people who are not people of color. And I wonder if you view that as a place that the judiciary has some work to do.
For sure. I think that I know that the debate about bail is going to continue both within this building and within the public square. I think I was here actually in my former role testifying a year ago about a bail bill, and those considerations I identified as a prosecutor apply certainly to a judge as well. Skepticism as to past records when they're out of state can be important. Sometimes what I'm finding, and I do sit in criminal occasionally at this point, the amount of information that's available immediately or for an after-hours call is sometimes incredibly limited. So we may know the sheer number of convictions or number of times that someone has not appeared, but until we're in court, we don't often get the context of what that was. I say, actually yesterday in Caledonia County, I had a gentleman come in on an arrest warrant. He was picked up by local law enforcement, and his reason for missing court was not being able to access his address or mail being sent, and the day of court he was in a hospital, and he had proof of that. And it was a very easy call to strike bail and move on with the case. But without his appearance, we didn't know the attendant circumstances. So that's sometimes important. The other thing I'll say as well, in an after-hours setting, the judicial officer does not have racial data or anything else available. We don't know. So whether John Smith is a person of color or Caucasian, there's no way to know. That's more apparent when there's a court filing. But that, in that sense, looking at someone's demographic data doesn't really shouldn't influence what the decision is as to risk of non-appearance or flight from the state.
And then I'm going to steal Senator Steer's question. Talk to me about the judiciary's role in navigating the crisis of substance use, or us. Just to me.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a saying that we're all in this boat together, and no one branch of government seems to have the recipe to address or solve the substance use crisis that's going on within communities. The court system, I think, has a fairly prominent role in this because, as other judges have already testified to today, people with substance use disorder do find themselves in court, whether for the traditional possession crimes or the necessity type offenses that are being committed relative to that. When someone's out of money and they're stealing food, or many of our unfortunately violent crimes, including armed robbery or assaultive behavior, revolve around access or attempting to secure supply of drugs. I was a big proponent of treatment court in Washington County when I was a prosecutor. I think it's a great program. Washington's fortunate to have a mature program with a really great coordinator, with buy-in from the judges who rotated through, and consistently willingness of the defense bar to refer clients there. And that system didn't happen overnight. It happened with slowly building trust, establishing systems, getting the right personnel there, and then managing sometimes difficult relationships with outside providers who had different, sometimes different objectives or goals or views on how things should be done. But with all that said, right now I do sit predominantly in the juvenile division. It's going to change at the end of the month. But I'll echo what Judge Malone and Judge Sparrow said about the role of family treatment court and consideration of giving people credit for small gains. And I think that the judiciary system itself, with judges included, have to meet people where they're at. And I find myself frequently commending people for just one or two negative urine drug tests. And that may not seem like a lot when we look back at the 6 or 7 or 12 months of inconsistent or sporadic engagement or behavior, but those small victories and I think validation from a position of authority, which judges have in that process, is integral. And I will say that in my part of why I was inspired to apply to be a judge was looking at and having the benefit of really outstanding judicial officers rotate through Washington County. And I won't name all of them by name, but the judges who handled the treatment court docket demonstrated the empathy, the understanding, and the commitment to provide sometimes a little bit of tough love to folks, but also to be a positive role model for people who in their lives may not have many or may have alienated their parents or supports who traditionally held that role. So using the authority of the judicial system to reinforce positive behavior and encourage people who are in a difficult situation is something that really sits with me and guides my practice.
And you're in juvenile in Caledonia? I should know this because I know it's been like public, but.
Yeah, no, so right now I have a split between Caledonia, Essex, and Orleans. So I currently hear juvenile cases of change, delinquency, youthful offender, and then also the relief for abuse and stalking dockets.
And you said that's changing soon? Where are you headed?
It is. So I will be with Judge Battles coming on board. It is allowed in the Northeast Kingdom. So I'll be full-time in Orleans County, and I'll be handling the criminal court docket moving forward.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. I was just curious. I don't know, Judge Keeble, I was just curious. I know she had 25% of your services under the military. Did that? I don't know the comparisons of. Can you briefly explain that to me? Did it help you moving forward? Is it similar?
Yeah. So looking back to my military experience, it was a lot of fun. If it wasn't for having to move every 3 years and being far away from Vermont many times, I might have stayed there longer. But the time period in which I came to the Army Judge Advocate General Corps was, an interesting one. It was, I began my active service in 2008, which was right after the Iraq War surge, and a lot of the younger JAG officers were deciding not to retain because of constant deployments. So I came in with, quite frankly, a lot of opportunity to do more advanced work at a young age. So as a young captain, within a year and a half of being in, I was already a supervisory prosecutor, which normally wouldn't happen until 4 or 5, 6 years in, and that was just a necessity because of manning. And that gave me some pretty unique opportunities with my assignment pattern to handle really complex cases at a young age and a young developmental stage professionally. So my first contested trial was a attempted murder and murder for hire, and that was after only 3 other small cases before that. When I look back now, I think it's crazy that I was trusted to deal with a case like that, but that was the reality of staffing at the time, that it really required my colleagues and I to step up and handle complex cases. The other thing I'll say about my military service, the Army Judge Advocate General Corps, was this concept of broadly skilled judge advocates. They didn't want us to just sit in one area. So it wasn't just they wanted expert prosecutors or expert defense counsel or expert operational law attorneys. They really wanted us to experience each and every one of those disciplines. So I spent time as an administrative law attorney, as a prosecutor, senior prosecutor, as a defense counsel, and then finally my last assignment was as an operational law attorney, which included my deployment with a special forces group as a legal advisor to them. So that was a really unique set of circumstances that provided first a lot of independence to make decisions, and in that setting it was very supportive. There's a lot of mentorship, a lot of training opportunities, but also very high stakes with the decisions and advice that was being rendered. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Judge Tittle? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I said, next Friday, we will devote some time for any citizens who wish to comment on the judges, and we may or may not vote as a committee on the judges. Senator Sheen will recuse himself from Judge Battles because he was, for reasons that are clear. And but if anyone wants to testify, they can either contact me or at ours here at ledge.state.bt.us.
I can never remember.
Ben
It's a mouthful.
at,
It's at B Donspach, DONSBACH @ledge.state.bt.
Anybody got that?
That's almost as fun as spelling my last name.
so, we will schedule whoever, if anyone wants to, comment. And with that, we thank the 6 judges for appearing in person, and Senator Bowles.
I have a quick question for you, just about the public comment. I wonder if we can put the contact information and some sort of statement on our committee page, so if the public didn't catch how to spell Ben's name, they have an easy way to.
I thought it would be Sears that they didn't catch that.
Maybe that one too.
My email is on the committee page. If they
Well,
didn't
we can do that.
Okay, that would be great. I just want to make sure the public has ample opportunity and ease of access.
Thank you all very much. We'll adjourn.